So, Pablo Suarez, welcome. It's really good to be talking with you. Now, we've known each other quite a long time, but I want you, please, to introduce yourself and describe what it is that you do.
Thanks so much, Nick, for the opportunity to be having this conversation with you in a way that can help others think about the things that we've been thinking about. My name is Pablo. I'm from Argentina. I'm a math geek. There was a time when I was a full-time researcher on climate and disasters, looking at how information can help us make decisions so that people don't suffer, so that we don't lose lives and things that matter. But for the past 15 years, I have also been a humanitarian worker, working with a diversity of organizations, trying to help connect what we know with what we do. And this can be everything from early warning systems for flooding downstream of a hydropower dam, or hurricane preparedness, or El Nino and droughts, all the way to long-term sea level rise and what are we going to do with what we know. Increasingly, my work has gravitated towards the design and development and deployment of innovative ways of getting awesome stuff done. The problems are too large for any one organization to do it alone successfully. So a lot of my work has been about bringing together scientists who know the way the world works, whether it's atmospheric science or health or a number of other things. Technologists, I have worked with machine learning people developing predictive models. I have worked with creative types with a technological scientific background for the purpose of helping like subsistence farmers in Togo, West Africa. I have also worked with really creative types, game designers, cartoon artists, filmmakers, for the purpose of enhancing, enriching, inspiring our communication. Too often we know what should be done, but it doesn't get done because people are not motivated, people may not receive the message in a way that captures their attention or their imagination. They may hear it, but not really bother. They may listen to it, but not really trust it. They may trust it, but not know what to do about it. They may know what to do about it, but not know how to get the stuff needed to make it happen. And very often there are scales from the person or household or community all the way to global organizations that need to work together. So getting to what will bring us together, what I am most interested in doing now is in creating breakthroughs for new collaborations, new modalities, new networks, new partnerships, new exploratory dimensions of how to bring different talents together, from hip hop artists and the president of the UN General Assembly being on the same stage for an event that I facilitated, all the way to whatever you are concocting with your good contacts.
Well, then you will know that we are of similar mind in that I know, as you do, that there is real power in bringing together disparate groups who have different ideas, who bring their own take on how to solve issues to the table. As you know, Pablo, because this is how we first met, our agenda at NCW is to try to leverage the power of the aerospace and defense sector in concert with all the other sectors out there to act on global challenges in a new and dynamic way, to get those breakthroughs that you've just been talking about. Before we get to how we first met, which is something in itself, what are the real challenges that you see on your radar screen out there in the world that need action urgently?
There are too many. In the space of the visible, what's above the surface, the climate is changing. It's posing not only the old threats, hurricanes. Right now, there's a hurricane about to hit the southern coast of the United States. There's poverty, there's lack of the right kind of energy, water, sanitation, etc. This is massive. A lot of that can be solved with either money or technology or organizational dedication. generally speaking, we know that we have what we need to do the right thing. What is not happening is the decision collectively among different people, those with political power, those with money, those with presence on the ground, to actually mobilize the scale, the ambition needed to solve existing problems, which are getting worse. And we're also getting all sorts of deeply concerning patterns, which can range from the atmospheric chemistry becoming something that could be manipulated by state actors or others, to block sunlight, to change the climate intentionally, which can create all sorts of havoc, maybe reduce global temperature, but who decides what are the geopolitical consequences? It can be complicated. And then all the way to racism and how power is exerted, how marginalization is intentionally crafted into policies and more. So what I think we need is to mobilize the power of humanity to create a collective aspiration for inclusive solutions, so that it's not only, I know, phenomenal possibilities for creating energy out of sunlight, but also that those who need the energy get it so that they don't suffer. And in that sense, what I see is that the ability to lobby, to influence, to advocate for certain things is now largely motivated by profit or by accumulation of political power. And I hope that we can do, as was done decades ago by the talents of Einstein and Bertrand Russell and so many others, to say, you know what, we need to create peace and prosperity in a different way, in a harmonious way.
So you and I first met, Pablo, in Washington, D.C., when in a different guise, I was organizing a conference of chief technology officers from the 9 aerospace and defense sector prime contractors. The idea being, these guys, their companies have locked up capability, which in our view needs to be deployed against these global threats. But understandably, given your background, there is huge resistance to engaging with these guys. Just remind me of your feelings on this subject when you first came to that conference, and in a sense, how you overcame at least some of them in the course of the few hours that you were there.
So let's be very clear. Since then, including today, and without a doubt over the coming weeks and decades, I hope, this very severe itch, discomfort, perception of toxicity of the aerospace and defense sector continues to make me feel a very complicated sense of I'm in the wrong place. Why? Because the aerospace and defense sector has one specialty, which is to create killing machines, to create devices, systems, etc., that can guarantee, maximize, optimize the successful extermination of human life on the other side. That I do not like, and as you can tell, I'm portraying it in words that are not poetic in the sense of loving. This is despicable. I understand the reasons why. I understand geopolitics. I understand that there are reasons for doing what people want to do. I happen to have a very hard time being under the same roof with people who say, if you give me the money, I'll develop a super weapon. And that weapon will kill as you want me to do. I don't like that. I cannot feel comfortable with that. At the same time, I understand the word is what it is. And I understand that people who develop systems that can create technologies that accomplish very sophisticated, delicate, precise tasks, there's a lot of talent there. There's a lot of brain power that follows opportunity. And there's a lot in the aerospace and defense sector that has managed to invite thinkers, technologists, scientists, system dynamics modelers, designers of complexity, organizational architecture, information management, people who just want to do awesome And a lot of what these companies do is not machines that kill, it's also everything else. It's also how to communicate better. It's also how to coordinate better. It's also, so there are the two sides. I mean, in what I do, there are some things that are likable and some others that maybe are not. And the same is true of all human beings and all institutions. No one is perfect. In this sector, I see a lot of unacceptable intentionality, but I also recognize that there's so much talent. And right now, we are living an era in humanity where we need to harness all powers to accomplish good. If some of that brain power happens to be currently sitting with companies or with entities that, among other things, perpetrate things that I don't like, I am willing to have a conversation because I believe that that talent is too important to the rest of us. And it's not just the individual talent, it's also, for example, the ability to advocate. Those companies that today are advocating for money going from taxpayer to government to weapons developer to weapons, they also have the power to advocate for money going from taxpayer to government to design of solutions for local, national, global needs to solutions. And that advocacy power, especially because the need is there, the talent is there, the new generation youth is screaming loudly and very intelligently that we need to rethink. If we could reorient the powers, the magnificent powers, not just technological, scientific, organizational, but also of lobby influence, so that it becomes in their own self-interest. If they want to be selfish, okay, be selfish, make money, solving the problems of the people who are suffering and who will suffer more. This is doable. I am willing to enter that space of conversation that you have so kindly created almost a decade ago. And very importantly, this was also part of the cognitive dissonance that I experienced. There are a lot of people who are genuinely good-hearted. To me, it was a surprise. I thought that the only possible worker in an aerospace and defense macro company that develops weapons, only mercenaries of brain power could work there. That was my prejudice. I'm sure those exist, but I also met people who actually want to do good and they want to develop technologies that can do good and are doing good. So can we harness that either as individuals or as sub-teams or as macro level organizational architecture of the aerospace and defense sector?
I just wonder, Pablo, whether you make any distinction in your own mind between weapons that are manufactured and go out and are deployed on the front line of humanitarian, on that humanitarian front line that you, of course, know so well, and a sort of and another set of capabilities that act in the name of defense, sort of national defense. Do you make any distinction there between sort of what we need in a sustainable way for, you know, each nation's right to defend itself, and then sort of overcapacity of development and production that goes out there into regions of tinderbox, you know, potential conflict and conflict that is unacceptable? Do you distinguish there, or is it all one bad set of stuff?
Look, if a new version of Mr. Hitler were to become incarnate and were about to come and kill everyone I love, I would be keen to find ways to stop that. So it's only a giant gray zone. I accept that there is no chemical purity in a position where this is the line, on this side is good, on that side is evil, and I know exactly the position of that line. All I'm saying is that as a general rule, a lot of what is being produced for the purpose of them being sold to entities such as nation states whose regimes change. And then it could be perfectly valid. I want to defend myself from that evil one that is attacking me, and then it becomes something else. And this is predictable. This is completely foreseeable. And I don't like my molecular constitution cannot feel comfortable with people who say, sure, you give me money, I give you something that is allegedly for good, and then maybe it's not for good. But again, having said this, to me, what matters is that, and I believe I heard this from you in that event long ago in Washington, that there's the tip of the iceberg that we see, which is the devices, the ships that can go fast to a place and do stuff, and then everything under the surface, which is the phenomenal capability of imagining what doesn't exist. That is what's missing in our sector, in the humanitarian sector. We are not paid by our donors, governments, foundations, and so on, to imagine alternative futures and make those radically different, better futures happen. We're given money, someone's hungry, get some food, go feed the hungry, heal the sick, shelter the homeless. Some of us, including myself, I'm lucky to be able to allocate a fraction of my time to thinking innovation and designing innovation for the humanitarian sector. But overall, see humanitarian work and human needs. And there's a lot under that tip of the iceberg in that phenomenally capable sector of aerospace and defense. Allow me to a personal story. I grew up in Argentina in the home of my grandma, Nonna Maria Cesarina Ottavina Becchini di Bertoncini, very Italian lady, very powerful. Whenever I wanted to do something that sounded to her as ridiculously ambitious, she would say, difficile come pestar la luna, Pablo, as difficult as stepping on the moon. And guess what? Humanity stepped on the moon before I was born. It is seeming 10, that's absurd, and yet it could be done. Someone said, let's do it, and they had to engage the aerospace and defense sector. There is no way to accomplish massive technological scale of awesomeness without drawing from that talent. We're in a similar situation now. I don't know how we're going to do something that organizationally works in a way that I will feel comfortable working, but that's what you're concocting. That's why I'm having this conversation with a very important caveat that I cannot be or be seen as doing anything on behalf of the humanitarian statute. We cannot work with weapons developers. So I am doing all of this in my personal capacity, but I want those capacities to help in the things that we have aligned incentives and desires.
Well, you've touched on something that's key to the way we think and the way I think and have for a decade or so, which is this is about awareness. It's about removing opacity. It's about allowing people to see what is there. It is our submission, as you know, my submission particularly, that there is this locked up capability in the aerospace and defense sector. It exists, as you say, below that waterline. If you think of its overall capability as an iceberg, and that to unlock it, we have to get governments, who are the main, if not exclusive customers of that sector, to become aware of it themselves. Even governments are not aware, for the most part, that this locked up potential to act on global challenges and in a sense to become the defender and custodian of the planet rather than nation states exists. So the thing that you touched on that was meaningful to me was that we need to engage the younger generation. We need to engage that young generational mindset, which is now coming into the aerospace and defense sector, as in other sectors, of course, millennials and Generation Z. So how would you like to see that generation engage in this discussion, Pablo?
So first of all, they will engage whether we like it or not. Greta used those words, Greta Thunberg, whether you like it or not. Youth has its own ways of expressing their presence and of deploying their creative powers. What I think they will end up doing, they of course being an extremely heterogeneous bunch of individuals, who occasionally form clusters and movements and globally transformative messaging and so on. But we have to accept the enormous diversity, including some who would happily develop weapons for the evil forces of the planet, and others who would do whatever they can to stand in between oil companies and the building of pipelines that will guarantee continued changing of our global climate. What we know is that as youth becomes young adults, and they are the ones who have to be hired to make stuff happen, they are not going to behave, they're not going to accept the same terms that were prevalent in our generation. So for example, secrecy. Secrecy is a fundamental element of the way the aerospace and defense sector works. It is founded on the premise that the other side will not know what you're doing. And right now, this generation looks with severe suspicion at anything that says, let's work together, but sign this document that says that you will keep my secrets, and if you break that law, I can send you to jail. This is a different generation. And they know to smell with suspicion anything that involves the mandatory absence of transparency. I am of the opinion that the aerospace and defense sector has to reimagine itself if they want to attract talent. The same is true of the humanitarian sector. We are not attracting the kids that are full of tattoos and earrings who are like hacker capable. And people with hacker capabilities, some of them want to steal your bank account, but most of them want to do good in a self-organizing network of competent people who don't want to be told, do as I say. They want to contribute their own talents and elements to things that happen. Youth is very much going to do that. And also they can resist in ways that we cannot imagine. So I hope that governments and other adult-driven entities can recognize that it's a new world coming, and that we need to give space for youth to flourish in the ways that these new principles, new ways of organizing, new ways to relating to information will evolve. And there's a drive to address problems from, Black Lives Matter is now populated by white youth as well as others. And there's going to be a lot of interest in making stuff happen that is good.
Well, I wonder what you think then, and as you rightly say, we are at an inflection point where we are seeing the bonds that have sort of held traditional institutions together. We see those bonds eroding and in some cases collapsing completely. I wonder what you personally would think of an aerospace and defense sector that would have as its official mandate the protection of the planet, in a sense, rather than the immediate goal of defending, nations, governments. What do you think that might do? How might that act on the mindset of this skeptical next generation?
Well, without a doubt, the nation state is no longer as defining of identity for the new generation as it was for our predecessors. People who are younger than us don't see in the idea of government and in the idea of national identity something that connects to their own personal values, principles, motivations, and so on. For that reason, I think that it's going to be increasingly possible to channel funding from taxpayers and from willing donors, whether it's corporations or individuals or others, to channel those into directly the thing that needs to happen, as opposed to going through an entity that then distributes the money. And without a doubt, people care for what matters to them, which tends to be either sectoral. Some people believe passionately in the need for renewable energy, and they will want to do that in a way that leads to more renewable energy, whether it happens in my side of the border or your side of the border. And whether it's led by a municipal government, provincial government, state government, national government, or cluster of nations in some economic bloc. Without a doubt, there is much more possibility to make the aerospace and defense sector recognize the irrefutable reality that within a decade or two, the levers of funding are going to look very different from what they look now. I don't know different how, but I have certainty that it's going to be very different. That the need to adapt to changing funding landscapes will lead to the realization that it's better to align with principle that has a good chance of surviving one administration. And even though I'm sure there are contracting modalities that can guarantee income for certain long-lived projects, I think it's much better to acknowledge that the climate is changing and will continue to change, and it's worsening and will continue to worsen. If we acknowledge that that needs action and that needs mobilization of intent to act by governments and others, then there can be so much more long-term transformational desirable, liked, appreciated. You know, I occasionally in Washington take the subway that goes from downtown to the airport, and it goes through the part that has, you know, both the Pentagon and the companies that serve the Pentagon. Those folks, you can smell it in their demeanor. They're trying to not be noticed because they know that people look at them with like, I don't think I like you. Imagine if people with that technological power were looked as, oh, you are one of those guys who are developing solutions for all of us, and therefore be liked. I think there's a lot of scope for changing the equation of reputation. The reputation of the aerospace and defense sector could be the reputation of the sector that helps the planet be better and thrive. A planetary solutions sector, not an aerospace and defense sector.
It's interesting that you raise this sort of demographic issue of the next generation not particularly wanting to go into the NGO sector either. You know, I'm always looking for common ground. And I wonder whether there's any common ground there in these two very disparate sectors who share this problem in a sense. You know, the generation of today and tomorrow does not want to or is reluctant to go into either of them. And yet the planet has never been in more jeopardy. Is there something, do you think, that we can broker there?
Yeah, and by the way, this is an insight from cartoon artists. There's a cartoon artist who I collaborate with, Pat Burns, who used to be a developer of guided missiles, and he's now an artist. And when we were talking about this potential exploration, humanitarians and aerospace and defense, he said with knowledge that folks in the aerospace and defense, they want things to get done. A lot of what happens under those secret clusters is a lot of development ideas that then end up in some shelf, because from thinking to doing to deploying, there's a long chain and often things don't happen. There's capability to get stuff done. And the same is true in the humanitarian sector. We are the only ones who can get some things done connecting global to local. Who goes to Somalia or Yemen or Syria today to help, feed the hungry or talk to the people who have weapons to pause the shooting so that we can go put a tourniquet on someone bleeding? There are some very unique capabilities in the humanitarian sector that allow to connect intent with action. The same is true of the aerospace and defense sector. And we have overlapping interests. There are people in the aerospace and defense sector who want to do good. That's the stated purpose. We want good, whatever that definition is. There must be overlaps. It's going to be complicated to sort out the inter-organizational space of convergence because there are too many misalignments in incentives. But I'm sure that with the help of you and your friends, something will be sorted out. And I look forward to being part of that exploration.
Well, as we approach the end of this interview, Pablo, or rather this chat and discussion, I mean, you know that we are here in my organization actively trying to break down those barriers, open up discussion and dialogue. But one of the ones that the barriers that I would like to see lowered as well, and we sort of touched on this, is the opacity, the veil, if you like, that exists around the NGO sector as well. In the sense that if we knew its needs, if the NGO sector published its needs and requirements in the same way that governments and defense ministries do for equipment, there may be some scope there for actually, sitting down at a table and going, okay, then how can we, as this systems of systems solutions provider as a sector, I'm talking about aerospace and defense, how can we meet your needs, which are also global, huge, and have massive implications for security? Because if we are faced with a struggling, deeply divided, unhappy, suffering world, that is just going to engender more conflict. And that is in no one's interest. So is there anything in that sort of that resonates with you? And do you think the humanitarian sector could be a bit more open about the way it publishes its needs and requirements?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. I hadn't thought of it in those terms. Let me first push back on one of the premises. The reason for opacity in the aerospace and defense sector is the intention of being opaque and not visible from the outside, because there are reasons for secrecy that need to be protected, and then someone has to put the eyeball in a machine and go through filters before the door opens. In our sector, the opacity is mostly because we haven't had the time to think about how to organize our thoughts about how to express our needs. If we could, we would express our needs very transparently and in a very organized way. It's just that we're so overwhelmed by the need to do what has to be done, and we cannot do it now. Right now, there are still people who are homeless, hungry, sick, and so on, for hurricanes, for COVID, for armed conflict. So it is more difficult for us to get our act together to organize the assessment of need and the expression of possible solution to that need. Item number one. Second thing, very related. We could express, as governments do, express to others who could provide solutions, such as the aerospace and defense sector, our needs, the terms of reference of, if you do X, then I will take it and use it. But when it comes to technology, technological solutions, my concern is that the aerospace and defense sector may be most inclined to say, tell me what device, what contraption I can create for you, because that's my comfort zone. And of course, that could be valuable, but think of shelter. Think of food. We already know the things that work to provide shelter to people, yeah? We already know and have what would be needed to help people have food. The reasons why people remain hungry, the reasons why people remain homeless is not predominantly because of the absence of a technology that gives a solution. It's mostly because of other things that have to do with bottlenecks at the organizational, motivational, etc. sector. People today who don't have good shelter in the Rohingya, phenomenally complex situation now in Bangladesh. If the aerospace and defense sector comes up with a little box that you push a button and becomes a magical 5-star hotel, I still have to deploy that, and we don't have what it takes, which is more about systems of systems. So my invitation to the sector is to think of itself not only as the technology developer, which in my opinion, once the technology exists, it won't be the solution, because the same bottlenecks will materialize, the same bottlenecks that keep people today hungry, homeless, sick, and so on. People die of diarrhea today. I once was bitten by a mosquito in a malaria area in Southern Africa. I consulted, I was told how to ensure that I wouldn't die. And I went to a pharmacy, and the thing was a 5-cent thing. And I realized that people die of malaria because they're not getting that 5-cent thing. Okay, so what I want from the aerospace and defense sector is not only the offer of technology, it's also the offer of thinking systems. the offer of thinking how to connect knowledge with action, with resources, with political will. We want the technology, don't get me wrong, but the silver bullet is not a bullet. The silver bullet is a way of relating. And I have seen under the hood a little bit of the extent to which the aerospace and defense sector, including its connections to academia, its connections to government, its connection to other aspects of the private sector, it's not just moving mountains. They can put a man on the moon. So let's aspire for that. And yes, short answer to your question, yes, I will do what I can to help the humanitarian sector notice that if we could make our needs more transparently visible to those with good hearts and good minds, maybe we can get more help than we're currently getting so that we can help more those in need.
Well, look, Pablo, on that hopeful note, and I like the fact too that we've sort of finished off on this discussion about technology and systems of systems solutions. I mean, this sort of, in essence, is where this whole discussion resides, at least on the aerospace and defense sector side. And, you know, you talked at the very beginning and you mentioned just now that, you know, about this, its response to getting a man on the moon. And that was as much a systems of systems response as it was a technological one. So, you know, I hope that same sort of systems of systems knowledge can be deployed out there to address these huge challenges that we've only just skated across in the way that, you know, we've both been discussing about. But, you know, I just wondered if you have any final thoughts before we close out. You know, are you hopeful? Are you a cynic? Are you, you know, what are your sort of aspirations for the immediate future when we think around this subject?
As a researcher at Mind, I find this time fascinating and this invitation from you phenomenally exciting, because there's so much power to do good, latent, waiting to be articulated and deployed. It's very, very exciting to know that I can have conversations with your friends and your contacts and to connect talent with need in a way that can be magically powerful. At the same time, as a humanitarian worker who understands what we know about what may come, I am terrified. I am genuinely in a state of perpetual darkness because I see what is happening and I see what is coming and I see how little some people care. I think the most important thing that we can try to do, the thing that makes me really excited about this conversation, is that we can activate the human impulse to care for others, as well as for self. Aerospace and defense, not in terms of defense technologies, but in terms of systems solution thinking and delivery, along with humanitarian sector, addressing global challenges. So much could happen there if only we reimagined what we care about. Let's.
Pablo, well, look, thank you. On that hopeful note, we will end it, but I'm extremely grateful to you for sparing the time today to talk to me and to us, and I wish you all the very best for the future.
There shall be more. Thanks so much, Nick.